Hello and a warm welcome to everyone. We would like to wish everyone a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Samantha from Safeopedia, and here at Safeopedia, it is our mission to support the EH&S professionals, operational folks, and any safety-minded individuals with free safety information, tools, and education. Just a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and we will send out a link to the recording to everyone in a few days. This webinar is for you, the audience, so we're going to keep it interactive. Make sure you get your questions and your comments into the GoToWebinar console, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. There is also a survey from today's sponsor, Compliance Quest, that will launch at the end of today's webinar. All North American participants of the survey will receive a $5 coffee gift card, so make sure you fill that out. Today, we are proud to present Access Granted, Discussion on Implementing a Permit to Work Program. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you today's presenter, Danica Fairfax. Danica has worked in safety for over 15 years for various industries, including waste, oil and gas, and grocery retail. She has a Certificate of Technology from Odessa College and a Bachelor's of Science in Occupational Health and Safety from Columbia Southern University. She owns Grime Time Safety, LLC, where she provides users and businesses with an online directory to connect and offer coaching solutions to their clients. She was born and raised in Houston, Texas, where she enjoys spending time with her family. I am very grateful to have you all sit back, relax, and enjoy this presentation. Danica, let's jump into it.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining this webinar, and it's nice to virtually meet you. So today's conversation is going to be more so a compliance conversation, full of just good information and things to think about, especially when it comes to implementing a permit to work program. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so on today's agenda, we're going to talk about assessing the now, understanding the current need of your organization. Then we'll move on to talk through seeking support from stakeholders. We're going to cover developing an attainable plan, and then avoiding frustration with communication and accountability. We're also going to discuss measuring success, and then we're going to end it with maintaining and sustaining the program using innovative technology. So at any given time, if you guys have questions, please feel free to add it into the chat, and we'll make sure that we get those answered for you. So assessing the now, understanding the current need. So here are just a few things to think about from an organizational holistic perspective when you start to think through a permit to work program and what that means for your organization. So how much do you know about your business and the work being done? One of the things that you find, especially with a company or organization, that originally you had standard operating processes and procedures that you had already put in place, but at some point things changed. It could have been an introduction to new equipment, a new process, a new way of doing things. And so one of the things that is very important is really understanding the business the way you see it today. And sometimes that means going out into the field, whether it's you or anyone that works under you, but somebody that's in the field that can actually tell you what is the current work being done today, and even possibly futuristically, what are things that we foresee in the future. In doing that, then the next question comes, have you identified the types of work permits needed? So one thing about an assessment, as you guys have probably done in your past, right? You go out to the field, you read the SOP, and now it's kind of like, hey, when did this work change? Or when was this hazard introduced? It's really important to understand from a work permit perspective, what are all the work permits you need? What are the ones you currently have in place? What are the ones that, hey, maybe we don't have something in place formally, but we're kind of doing something with it because at some point, someone identified, hey, we got an opportunity here, guys. We need to do some work and we need to implement some type of program to educate our employees and make sure they understand how we're going to work with this potential risk or hazard going forward. Then you start to ask, do you foresee any changes to the way the work is done in the future? So bigger picture, thinking through any new regulatory requirements that are coming out, any new mandates, or any additional work or business lines that the company anticipates basically doing in the future. And those are the questions that you have to start asking in the beginning. And I guarantee you, it'll help you in the long run as you're planning out the work that has to be done and the best approach to implement your program. Other questions, how will a permit to work program impact the workers, community, and business? So I know what you're thinking. You know that there's a hazard potential for workers, but don't forget about social impact, right? That could be the community. So think about everyone that lives in the community around the area where the work is being done. How could that potential hazard affect them in some way? And then ultimately the business. Once you've thought about the employees, you thought about the community. And when we say community, we're also talking about the environmental impacts that could potentially take place. Then you think, as a business, what is our stance going to be when we implement this program? And how do we implement it and approach it in a way to where all of these other factors are educated about it, knowledgeable about it, and we put something in place to help us should we have an issue that affects any one of these other areas? Next question, are there any current gaps that should be considered? So this is when you're taking your current process, you're looking at the way the process was written, and then you're looking at the future process, and you're doing that gap analysis comparison. You're going through and really identifying what are our opportunities to either enhance our program, improve our program, or are we introducing an entirely new program that we didn't have before? What will it take to roll this program out? Is this something that's focused on a terminal, region, or is it a whole entire company initiative? And so from an organizational leadership and change management perspective, sometimes we can hone in on one area without seeing the bigger picture, again, holistically of how could this potentially impact the entire company? And then what does this rollout look like when you start to think about the specific needs of certain regions, areas, or terminals? So you might have an addendum to your program depending on what it is. And then lastly, what are the potential exposures, implications if the company does not implement the permit to work program, right? So what happens if you don't do it? You already know that there may be some regulatory implications, right? You could receive a fine or anything like that. And then it's the potential for injury and exposure because we didn't do anything with it. But also, I challenge you to look outside of that as well and bring that additional information, especially when you start to look at your stakeholders and trying to gain that support. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. So ultimately, upfront, how much do you know about your business and the work being done? That's going to be critical because what you don't want to have to do is start approaching your plan or program thinking you know everything just to find out there are some other opportunities. So now you have to go back and rework the work that you've already been done. That's already been done. Next, seeking support from stakeholders. So identifying key stakeholders is key. I know you guys have probably heard that before, right? Identifying key stakeholders, it's key to any process, it's key to the success of the business, but the question is, what does that really mean? How do you really approach that? And how do you even know who your stakeholders are? So here's some things to think about. The more stakeholders know, it helps them understand the overall goal. So it's education, being able to provide background upfront, being able to tell everyone that has a vested interest in this is how it could potentially impact or affect your line of business if this is or is not done. Meet with them prior to group meetings to help them understand the ask. So one of the things that I've done in the past, and I found that it works, When I know and I've identified who could directly or indirectly be impacted by this change, by implementing this program, I go ahead and schedule one-on-ones. And the reason why is because everybody wants to know, how does this affect me? And you can get more dialogue and understanding in a one-on-one conversation, which it can be challenging once you get a whole group together. Because typically, when you get a whole group together in a room and you're showing them a new initiative and you're giving them information about it, they're not sure how to feel within that moment. Why? Because it's still new. But if you're able to have as many one-on-one conversations to allow those to ask the questions that they have, it's going to help you in the long run, because I guarantee you, number one, that is not the only person that has that question. So you get the opportunity to do the research and get the information to provide to those stakeholders. So by the time your bigger group meeting comes, you have a list of questions that you can include the information in your approach, that it may help people get a little bit more comfortable, right? So make sure you include the right people to ensure areas that may be directly or indirectly are aware and can provide input. Then be prepared to answer tough questions and provide countermeasures. So here's the thing, any new program that you roll out, whether it's a permit to work program or any other initiative that you have, you want to make sure you're providing thought. People like when you think and consider their business, even in ways that they didn't even think and consider it. It helps with credibility of the project and plan that you're putting out there. So if you've already answered those tough questions and you've already gotten feedback from individuals on how they received it, did they understand it, that they feel good about it, you can take that on the road. And when I say provide countermeasures, it's not about solving all the problems, but it is about educating those on potential countermeasures that can be put in place to mitigate the risk. And that's all this really is. Building a rapport up front helps to establish credibility. So when you start having your one-on-one conversations and you're meeting with stakeholders, when you build up that rapport, it just helps build the trust and credibility with them. Because at that point, things that they like to see, that, and this is just things that I've seen in the past, and this is human nature. As a stakeholder, someone that's taken the time to research their business, understands what their current initiatives and goals are, understands what drives their business and motivates it, and you found a way to communicate that to where it applies to what they're doing, it helps them make decisions a little bit faster. It gets them more comfortable with the work that you're doing. And it makes it easier for you as you're trying to roll out your program. And that is the kind of support that you need. So seeking support from stakeholders, it can be time consuming upfront, but I guarantee you, once you get your first initiative kicked off, every project that you have going forward, you've already developed that rapport and understand that key audience and stakeholder. So it makes it easier for you to get them engaged early on and get that support early on for any other projects going forward. So seeking support from stakeholders, it's essential, it's important, and it's super helpful, especially when it comes to permit to work, because from a regulatory perspective, a lot of us have the knowledge, and kind of the challenge is, how do we get all of the knowledge that's in our head out into the field to the ones that make those decisions? And so to do that, it's about communication, education, and helping them understand it from your perspective, and them also realizing that this could potentially impact you if you don't do something about it. Next, developing an obtainable plan. So sometimes when we have initiatives, we have big goals. We want to get it done. We want to get it done fast, efficiently. We want everybody to love it, and we want it to be a win. To do that, though, you have to set realistic goals and be flexible. One of the key things that we've all had to learn, especially within the last 2 years, is how to be agile and flexible in every situation, because you never know what could happen next. Sometimes things change. Just when you thought you knew the business, like we talked about earlier, Now you've gone out there to do an on-site assessment just to find out there are some additional hazards that weren't there before. Just when you thought you were going to talk about working at heights and develop a new program, you find out that there's some sort of radiation exposure that's out there. So then you have to start thinking through, okay, what does that mean now for the business? What does that now mean about my plan that I had in place? So here's some things to think about. Sometimes things change, but you have to be prepared for it and allow yourself the flexibility to handle and deal with it. This is where you may find there are more permit to work opportunities once you learn all the work being done. The main thing is don't lose focus of the goal. So things to remember when you're working for an organization, let's say you go out there and you're thinking, I'm just going to focus on working at heights. Now there's this potential radiation threat or a confined space threat that's out there in the field. Also, make sure you kind of use your lifelines, right? Which are the other people working within the organization. If there are teams that handle any type of radiation exposures for the company that have radiation safety officers out there, or let's say there are other members that they focus on confined space, or even think about those that may focus on industrial hygiene. This is the opportunity to collaborate with them to say, hey, I was out on the job site, this is what I saw, and you may be able to collaborate with them to say, hey, can you handle this piece of it because that is your area of expertise, and you work together because at the end of the day, it's still that common goal of what are the things we put in place to make sure we're getting our employees to work safely and in safe environments. So create a detailed plan and ensure it's managed so you don't lose momentum. Sometimes we can lose momentum when things change because it's like a stop halt. We're not sure which way to go. We're not sure what to do. This is where you have to give yourself permission to be flexible and give yourself a timeout to say, okay, I may have to change my approach, but what does that look like? And be okay knowing that you don't have to take it on by yourself. But remember those stakeholders and that support and building those relationships, all the stuff that you did earlier? That's the time to use them as a resource as well to say, hey, I know this is what we said we were going to do, but we had to change a plan. Any advice or anything, any considerations on things we could do? And those are the ones that can put you in touch with the right people so you're able to move forward so you don't lose momentum. And then plan your end-to-end process for your permit to work program. So you got to have a plan that gets you from start to finish. That's going to keep you on track and organized, and it's also going to get your workers out in the field and anyone else that's going to take on your initiative or program to actually do it, follow it. You make it flow. It's going to be streamlined, and that's going to make people want to do whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. Avoiding frustration with communication and accountability. So communication empowers others. People want to know what they're supposed to be doing. And the best way to do that is to make sure you effectively communicate what the expectations are. So you have to set clear expectations on what you want to achieve. The main thing is educate everyone on the process. So who is responsible for training employees? Because remember, we're talking about a permit to work program. Who's going to be responsible for that? And then how will the permits be managed? So think about futuristically, your current process today. If it's a new one, then you're developing it from scratch. If it's one that you already have in place, it's reviewing it and looking at it to say, what could we do better, right? So you have a paper process, or if you're managing it in a database, what could you do to enhance that program? Because you also got to think about if you're using a paper program, how are you storing it? How long are people keeping the paper documents for? But ultimately, what do they do with the information once they have it? And if it's stored in a database, it's the same thing. What do you do with the data once you've collected it? What happens when there's an issue on site or change to the work? So make sure you're including that in your program. If something changes, what do you want people to do? If there's an issue, how do you want people to react? Who should they contact? And then what are the next steps? What is that process? And then lastly, what happens if the process is not followed? That's letting those that are actually using the program know if you don't follow the process, what happens? That way, nobody's surprised at anything that could take place once your program is in place. Now, is it going to be perfect? Are you going to have the answer to every question? No. But people can appreciate the fact that you took the time to actually let them know pros, cons, what will happen, what won't happen, and how it's supposed to happen. And they are very clear on their roles and responsibilities should anyone come ask. And then make sure everyone understands their role and what they are being held accountable for. So the interesting part about communication empowers others, and this is what I found. Education is key at different levels in understanding your audience. So things you may want to consider even when rolling out your initiative. What does the training look like for leadership and executives? What does it look like for managers? What does it look like for those actually doing the work? Will the training all be the same? Or should it be geared more towards your audience to help them understand how they play within your initiative and within your program? And that's what people want to know. You also want that education to be out there because there's going to be a time when people are going to talk about your program and you won't even be in the room. And the question comes into play that could a manager have a conversation with a senior leader and at the end they are still aligned on expectations because everyone has now been educated. When that starts to happen again, that further validates the program that you put in place. It helps people see it differently and it makes them want to use it because they see the value in it, because they're able to have good, progressive, positive conversation and start to discuss how it moves forward. Measuring success. So how do you know the program is effective? A lot of times you see programs that are rolled out and it's great. We'll do a ribbon cutting. We'll do some nice bracelets and shirts and everybody's a part of the program. We may even have cake and steak, whatever it is to get the information out there and to get people engaged and excited about this new initiative. But the question then becomes, how do you know it's effective? Was it just a flavor of the month? Is it something we're just kind of going to do? And that's where you come into play to say, how am I able to actually show not only did we roll this out, not only is it an effective initiative, not only is the permit to work program working, the employees like it, the managers see the information they can pull, the data they can pull, and it's helped us progress and even enhance and maybe streamline some of our current processes on the work being done. How do you make sure that that message is getting out there? So it's so important to develop a process to audit or check if the permit program is even being used and is it being used correctly. But you're the one, since you are creating this initiative, you have to tell people, what does an audit look like? What does a check look like? What does a good audit look like? If they didn't pass, and let's say they're completely using the permit to work program wrong, they're not training employees, nothing is being logged, nothing is in the system, what happens with that? Then start to think outside of the box about the data you're capturing. Get creative on the data that you capture. Find ways to provide that data to leadership in ways they didn't think. And so one thing about regulatory, the regulation tells you this is the bare minimum that needs to be included. And there's nothing that says you can't add on to your program to enhance it, especially to meet your business needs, to gather data that maybe you weren't even collecting before. And that's okay. But the main thing is whatever data that you capture, you have to do something with it. So find ways to use the data to improve the program. You can definitely use it to find those indicators that you guys have been looking for, or help develop KPIs around it. But the main thing is, if you're going to implement something, you got to find a way to measure it, because you also want to provide that information to your stakeholders to say, thank you so much. I appreciate you supporting this initiative. And this is the data that I have to validate it. The important part, though, is the audit and check. You want to make sure you're getting good, clean data in so that you can have good, clean data going out. So that's how you measure your success ultimately. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you are used to it. I just challenge you to find a way to get creative with your data. Take it above and beyond. You're collecting it for a reason. So it's need to start thinking about how else could we use this data. All right, lastly, maintaining and sustaining the program using innovative technology. So think about today how we see innovative technology. You hear a lot about AI. You hear a lot about avatars and just automation. Everything is becoming automated. And how do we use electrical sources to do different things? So as you're going through the program, thoughts about how do you implement technology into the way you're doing your program? What are the things you should be thinking about? And think about a wish list. If this is my work permit to work program, what are things I would like to see? And it's okay, even as you're having your one-on-one discussions with the stakeholders, ask them kind of what their wish list is. What would you like to see out of this program? Because that's definitely things to consider as you're implementing it and you're writing out your detailed plan on what is kind of the final outcome and then what happens next. So, how do you plan to sustain the program? That's the big question. Do you want it to be a flavor of the month, or do you want it to be something that is truly sustainable, that 2 and 3 years from now, you get the opportunity to say, wow, they're still using this program, and not only are they using the program, but they're building upon it. Because that's cool. The cool thing about a program or initiative, you may start it one way, but you never know what it can grow into. And that's why it's so important early on when we talk about planning and being flexible and being open, working with your stakeholders, understanding their business. The more you input into it, the more your initiative and program will grow, because then people will want to use it because it's easy, right? You've already trained the organization on it. Everyone's already familiar with it. The thing is, anytime new work is introduced, anytime a new hazard is introduced and you need to implement a permit to work program, it's easy now just to come to your program and say, hey, we have a new hazard. Can we add something here? And that's what you want, something that's robust, sustainable, and that will grow over time. So when you think about technology, I always encourage people to just think about it and think about the many uses of it and how you can use it just to enhance, streamline, improve your business. So technology allows you to manage the program from anywhere. It provides you the opportunity to see up-to-date information, but you get to see it in a holistic view. So being able to see your program, whether it's from an organizational standpoint, based upon region, based upon terminal, however you want to see it, you can do it that way. And you can develop reports to show that. It just allows you that streamlining opportunity for implementation, and it also allows you the opportunity to standardize your process. So I always encourage those to seek innovative technology whenever you can, because it just makes it more efficient. And the other thing is, should anybody leave the company, whether you think about employees out in the field or managers out in the field, when you implement technology, everybody will still see the same information consistently. And then if you change something, technology allows you to do it and for everybody to always see your latest and greatest. So it's just things to think about. So this is it in a nutshell when it comes to implementing a permit to work program. The main things are, you want to have a plan. You want to get the right people involved up front. You want to make sure that your initiative is sustainable, not perfect, but sustainable with the ability to grow and progress over time. Is it a lot of work? Yes. Is it easy? Sometimes. But when you do it for the first time and you actually go through the process, you end up using kind of that same and flow process going forward. And we all know that permit to work programs, those are critical to any industry and any business. So it's important to really get out there, understand the work that's being done, understand the work of yesterday versus today, versus the work you look to see tomorrow. And make sure you're just having those conversations and considerations on impact to employees, the community, the environment, and the company. So that's all I have for you guys today, and that's it in a nutshell. And I appreciate your time in attending the webinar. And please, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danica, for all the valuable information from today's webinar. Before we hop into the Q&A, I want to remind everybody that there is a survey at the end of this webinar. And for all North American participants that do fill that out, there is a $5 coffee gift card that will be provided to you today by our sponsor, Compliance Quest. And a little bit about Compliance Quest. They will help you to transform to a fully connected business with a next generation AI-powered quality and safety management platform. Their connected suite of solutions helps businesses of all sizes increase quality, safety, and efficiencies as they bring their products from concept to customer success. Compliance Quest's intelligent data-driven platform comes with the best-in-class integrated process to mitigate risks, protecting your employees, suppliers, and brand reputation, and to increase innovation, compliance, profit, and customer loyalty. Compliance Quest is pre-validated and easy to implement, use, and maintain, allowing for streamlined communication and collaboration across the product value chain. So with that, we're going to jump into the Q&A. First off, Danica, again, I want to thank you so much for the valuable information. What are your best recommended first steps to take this information today and to use it in the workplace?
So first steps are always just about identifying the work that needs to be done. So taking a step back and really doing kind of that gap analysis assessment. Identifying kind of what is your focus, what is your goal, what would you like to see, or what is it that others are asking you to see? Then understanding the business. When I say understanding the business, my biggest thing is knowing the history of the company, because if you don't know the history, then it's hard to see where a company's been and how they're supposed to move forward. That history is also really significant because you want to know, has this initiative been done before? And if so, how was it done and what happened? What were the pros? What were the cons? What worked? What didn't work? That's going to help you avoid bumping your head or just learning from other challenges that happened in the past. So that way, when your initiative comes out, you're taking a different approach. And people like the fact that you've considered kind of what they've been through already and you're trying to change it up and maybe even make it better than before. So at least you took the time to understand their business. Once you've done that, the rest starts to come together. It's doing your research, understanding the now, understanding where you want to be, getting insight from and feedback, not just from senior leadership, but also the people that are actually doing the work. It's so important to talk to them because this is kind of your key audience. They're the ones that are actually going to push your program and your initiative. So those, I would say, are the key steps: doing your research, getting a better idea of where you stand, the now, understanding where you want to be, identifying those opportunities, and then starting to proceed and just seeking support from stakeholders. It's key because someone out in the field can be your stakeholder.
Absolutely. It's so important to know your audience. And to do that, you should know your history, review those annual reports, and you'll have a better chance of having your voice heard because you'll have a little more qualified information.
Yes, indeed.
So this next question, how do you manage multiple permits at one time?
So it takes organization. Organization is the key. So when I say implement technology, it's not just for the people in the field. For myself, things such as OneNote, learning how to use your Outlook email, anything or any program that helps you organize what's going on. So when you're kind of juggling multiple permits, the first key thing is identifying what are all the permits that you have, the current process for each one of those permits. You find any opportunity you can to streamline the tracking of them, and any opportunity you can to even just kind of download them all into one program or piece of technology. It's super helpful. But the technology piece, especially when you're having to have to juggle multiple ones at multiple sites, because not every site will be utilizing the same permit program for some companies. So you got to have a way to know kind of who your audience is, who's using what, how they're using it, and a place where you can kind of house all the information into one. That's the biggest piece that I see, and the biggest challenge for some professionals, especially at larger organizations. But to be honest, even at smaller organizations, it can be a challenge, especially if it's only you managing the program. So you got to figure out a way to get organized, but figure out the one that's most comfortable for you. I also encourage those to be flexible and be open to change. As much as we want an organization to be open to change, sometimes we have to be open to change ourselves. So explore those opportunities to maybe change the way that you're doing things, where you may have been managing one permit to work program, now you're managing several, and not one of them is more important than the other one just because you may use one more than the other. So you got to stay on top of it. So I encourage you to find a way to organize your information, stay on top of your programs, make sure you're meeting all the regulatory requirements, and staying on top of your training. So again, any type of technology you can implement to track all of that, that is what's going to help you.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to remember it's exactly what you said. If you're expecting change, you have to be adaptable as well. All right, so the next question here, from your experience, do you believe that the utilization of these metrics and measures help to make the organization more competitive by utilizing the innovative technology?
Oh, yes. The reason why is because there's so much public information out there now. People can learn all kinds of things about your organization or company just by simply going online. So being able to get creative with your matrix and being able to figure out and really dig down into some of the root of some of the data that you're seeing, it's going to be important. And it's a combination of things. So what I've seen in the past is there's definitely more collaboration around numbers, especially when you're trying to gain that competitive edge. So I've done it in the past where I have actually researched competitors. I want to know how they think. I want to know how they do business. I want to know what kind of programs they have out there. That's what's driving their success. Then I come back and look at my organization and say, okay, what are we doing? What are we not doing? And what is something that can put us ahead of the rest? And what are we seeing in numbers? And so it's often been a collaboration with multiple teams and departments. I want to know about the people. I want to know about the people aspect of it. I want to know how our workers are doing and how many hours they're working. I want to know if they're working more than our competitors or less than our competitors to get the job done. And if so, why is that? I want to look at the accidents. I want to look at the type of accidents we're having, the areas that we're having them at, and understand why is that happening. Then I want to know from a communication standpoint, are we talking about it? Because if we're having the same type of accident in 5 different areas, but those 5 different areas had no clue about the other accidents, what was our opportunity to potentially stop that from happening or help a driver or an employee avoid that from happening? So I'm a stickler for metrics because I feel like there's always a story behind the numbers. And I like to see beyond the surface of what the numbers are telling me, because I want to know, did it happen at day? Did it happen at night? Did it happen on the weekend? When do we use our permits the most? What terminals are in the field? What type of permits are out there? Are there additional ones we should have out there? Or do we have some that are out there that we don't even really need because the work has changed? I want to know everything about it because that helps me diagnose some other opportunities that sometimes you can't see. I want to hear from the fleet teams. I want to see what they're seeing. I want to hear from operations. Tell me about your numbers and what you're seeing when it comes to the work. Are we having issues when it's winter, spring, fall? What is the information that gives us that competitive edge that helps put us further than our competitors? Because I can guarantee you your competitors are doing the same thing.
Absolutely. Our next question goes back to adaptability. So they say, when you state that we have to adapt, do you mean that we have to reassess the entire process or actual activity on a daily basis, especially if you have temporary workers?
It could be a little bit of both. So that's the tricky part about adaptability. The way that work was done 30 years ago is not done the same way today in some situations. So the main thing from adaptability standpoint is understanding what is the current work that's being done now? How has it changed? How has that change affected? Whether it's employees, the job, has it made the process longer? Has it made the process shorter? What are the exposures that we have today that maybe we didn't have before? And how did we adapt or change that? So adaptability is really a tricky thing. You know, we roll out initiatives and we have an expectation that everybody will do it because it's the right thing to do. But we also find ourselves dealing with our own challenges when it comes to adaptability, because sometimes it's changing the way we've thought about things in the past, or our approaches, and the way we've done work in the past. So I think it's mutual, and you can see it both ways. Adaptability comes in different ways. I mean, even think about now, and it's just more from a office employee. You had employees that were used to going in the office. Now they're working from home. You have workers that are working in the field, but now there's this automation piece that's coming into play, and they're trying to figure out how to deal with that. And then as professionals, we're trying to figure out the matrix that we used to have before. Now we're measuring different things. So adaptability, it comes in different ways, and being able to fail forward, be future thinking, and foreseeing the opportunities, it's important.
Absolutely. So this next question asks, when it comes to lead indicators for accidents, should or would they have to be considered from the very beginning?
I think they should, only because when it comes to leading and lagging indicators, going back when we talked about knowing the history of the company, it's important. So you know it's something there, right? There are times though when you start with a new company, right? What if they don't have anything from the past to work with? What are you supposed to use? So you're kind of starting from scratch. Even when you start from scratch though, there's so much industry knowledge out there, that there are statistics that you can kind of use as a baseline, especially when you're assessing the type of work being done for that industry. So yes.
Perfect. So this question is in regards to ensuring that remarks are concise once a permit is closed out. They want to know, how do you ensure that when the permit is closed out, that all the comments, questions, remarks are concise. They also go on to say there should be recording of data in the DOORS program, which technicians may enter info from all permits closed.
Yes. So this goes back to your audit and check process. Putting something in place to say once it is closed out, everything is in the system. Who reviews that final one to make sure there's nothing else that is needed, that it was very clear and concise, and there's no follow-up that is needed for that particular job or work being done. And also when you start thinking about dealing with multiple contractors, how is that communicated? So that's important to make sure you implement in your program and your process to make sure that it meets not only company specific requirements, but what are you doing with your contractors and how are you communicating that information to them? And then also, what do you do with the information for jobs going forward that may need to be just put out there? So it needs to be clear and concise. It needs to be spelled out. And I encourage you to have someone review a closeout to make sure everything was included and there are no red flags or anything or any call outs, because sometimes you'll see it. If no one's looking at it, they'll put anything.
That's fantastic to know. Another question is, do you have any input on why permit to work fails sometimes?
I feel like sometimes it fails because there's no one really watching it. sometimes I've seen it because there's really, the educational piece is more so, this is what we're going to do and that's it. There's no discussion about the whys. No one really understands. They just know we kind of got to do it. So that communication is really important, especially upfront with training, especially when you're starting the project out. Everyone needs to understand not only this is their responsibility, not only that this is the regulation, but also this is the right thing to do, and this is why it's the right thing to do. This is what could happen as a result of not doing it. The other part is kind of that follow-up piece of just making sure people are doing it. If people see, or employees see, that no one's really looking at the program, they're not really checking it, then anything pre-printed that you have, everybody's just going to sign off and do business as usual. And then, unfortunately, things happen, right? That force us to start looking at it, and that force us to go back and say, okay, let's talk about the program. Let's make sure all the steps were followed. Let's see all the documentation. Let's see what was recorded. And you find that it really wasn't being done at all. So if the company doesn't do anything with it, if no one really believes in it, if everybody's just like, hey, it's just status quo, what we got to do to say that we did it, then typically it does fail.
That is great information. So this question asks, who is responsible for the permit to work system failure?
Could be a combination of people. So that's one where you actually have to do a thorough investigation to understand kind of what happened or what was at fault. And here's the other thing that I encourage you to do as well. Even when you implement a system, the system only knows what you tell it to do. So it's important that you double check that to make sure human error versus systems error is avoided. So when it comes to responsibility, it's how your company has outlined it. And think about this, a lot of times from a contractor perspective, we understand and know that contractors should have things in place, but also realize as an organization, if you hired that contractor, you still make sure that they're doing everything that they said they're going to do.
All right, and one last question here. They'd love your input on SEGs used by industrial hygienists when conducting baseline surveys for a particular job or company.
One more time, the question?
So they'd like to
Sorry.
know your input on SEGs used by industrial hygienists.
So that part, I don't want to answer on behalf of an industrial hygienist because I am not one, but I can tell you that assessment in that process, it's really about the industrial hygienist, whether you've contracted them out or they're working for you. It's really a discussion that you would have to have on them. So I don't have much of an answer on that one.
No problem. We will send over their information and you can reach out to them offline to see if we can get it squared away. But that is all the questions that I have from the audience today. Before we wrap it up, Danica, is there anything you wanted our audience to take top of mind or have as a key takeaway from today's presentation?
Yes, you can do this. Any initiative, especially when it comes to a permit to work program, it's probably not the most exciting topic, but it is an exciting topic when you're doing the right thing with it and you're trying to help your organization and employees, provide them with a safe environment to work in where they understand the hazards, what's going on, and what to do about it. Just empowering them on if there's an emergency, what happens, what are the potential hazards out there, and educating them so they can own it, and be a part of what's going on out in the field. And also just helping them see that you have a voice. If something's wrong, then say something. If something has changed, then say something. The biggest thing is you can do this as an organization. You can do this working with your employees. You can do this. And it's critical. It's definitely critical to any business. And it doesn't matter if it's employees working for you or contractors working for you. It's still the right thing to do. And I know it feels like sometimes it's not always easy to roll these things out and to gain support, but I encourage you to take heed of some of the steps that I've given to you. Try them out and see what happens, because it needs to get done. And it's not just because it's regulatory. Regulatory is a big piece of it, but also it's the right thing to do. And we owe it to our employees to make sure that that's getting done. So you've got this, you can do this, it's important. Go after those stakeholders, make sure you have a plan. Don't be afraid of technology, it can help you. Um, and that's all I have.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Danica. And of course, I want to thank Compliance Quest for allowing us to put this presentation on today. And as always, thank you to the audience for being here today. We couldn't do it without you. So on behalf of Safeopedia, I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. Thank you to all the dedicated safety professionals for the great work they do on a daily basis. Just a reminder, take that survey at the end and you'll receive a free gift card from Compliance Quest. As always, we will be sending out a link to the recording to the presentation and the slide deck to everyone in a few days. Thanks again, take care, stay safe, and remember, as Danica said, you can do this. Bye everyone.